Thank you so much, and I will try to make up some time so we get back on our schedule. I am Jess Long. I've thrown up some contact details here. Feel free to tweet throughout the session. I trust you will pick flattering photos only. I've included my website. I'm pacing about one blog entry per decade, so you should be able to knock it out in a very limited time window. In a nutshell, I was born and raised waterfall. I dabbled in Kanban, and I settled down with Scrum. I can speak fairly intelligently to each of these. I can give you textbook definitions as to one might work better than the other, but I'm not going to do that, not today. Instead, I'm going to tell you a little about myself, my personal backlog. And I will tell you that I pride myself in being a minimalist. So this is an iteration from about maybe 10 years ago, and I had limited down to the prioritized items, the most important, the MVP. No nice to haves here. So let me go through this. Top of the list, relocate to waterfront property. Number 2, create outdoor living space. I'm a huge HGTV fan. Number 3, have a kid. Number 4, have another kid. And last on the list, update my kitchen. Well, first things first, relocate to waterfront property. I'm going to jump right to the picture here, as I feel really good about this. I was able to find a property about maybe 30 minutes driving distance from the hub of where I work, which is Wilmington, Delaware. And it's the house, the greenhouse in the center of the picture. This actually sits on the Delaware River. It overlooks the bay. And I felt really good about this. I even did upfront planning. I learned that if you find a property within visibility to a nuclear power plant, your home is all the more affordable. And with those cost savings, I was able to afford a 15-year mortgage. After all, I was not going to need very much disposable income. The house was small, and Murphy's Law was not going to apply to me. What could possibly go wrong? Back to my backlog. I had knocked this one out of the park, was ready to mark it as complete. By now, I was ready to start my next item, create outdoor living space. Now, I'll bring you back to the point where I was touring my now property. And I remember walking around the premises and stumbling across a pile of sand that sat next to the seawall. And I remember kicking this pile of sand very curiously, and the seller looked at me and said, "That's a horseshoe pit." And I thought, that's rather strange that you would put a horseshoe pit, something you throw large metal objects at, directly in front of a seawall, something designed to maintain the structural integrity of a property. But I am not a horseshoe expert, and I like the idea of games, so I didn't question this. Well, after the first storm, when we moved in, I realized that my horseshoe pit was not, in fact, a horseshoe pit. I'll go to the picture here. This actually was a poorly covered up sinkhole. This was the beginning stages of the sinkhole. It got so big that a forklift could fit inside. And I know that because a forklift actually ended up inside of the hole. But that's another story. What I will tell you is that in the waterfront community, when a sinkhole develops on your property, your neighbors become very enthusiastic around your remediation plans. And they had a lot to say. All of a sudden, this went from becoming an individual project to becoming a corporate initiative. Now the homeowners association was involved, and they had a lot of ideas around the timeline and the budget. So, long story short, back to my backlog, sometime later we didn't create an outdoor living space, we maintained an outdoor living space. So we have a bit of a change in scope here, but all the same, ready to call this one done. It was fixed. Next on my list, have a kid. Well, even I recognize this was less of a story and more of an epic. So I realized I needed to break it down. And I realized to have a kid, I'd need to do a number of things. I'd need to save money. I would need to read about parenting. I'd have to convert a room into a proper nursery. And I'd have to get knocked up. Well, first one was fairly easy. I opened a 529 account, figured out how much I could contribute each paycheck, and I had already started saving. Next, I bought the What to Expect When You're Parenting, or What to Expect When You're Expecting, and about 10 pounds of other literature, and I was ready, I was educated. Convert room into a proper nursery. Now my house is almost 100 years old. And I realized to do this correctly, I was going to need to rip out everything down to the foundation, to the bare bones. That meant ripping out the ceiling, the walls, the carpet, which I'm pretty sure was original to the house. And I'll bring you to the picture here. This is what the room looked like when we did the tear out. And if you look in the bottom left-hand corner of the picture, you'll see there sits 3 buckets. The reason for that is because when we tore out the ceiling, we could see the sky. And when it rained outside, it rained inside. Back to my backlog, we had identified dependencies, not part of the plan. We were going to need to cut down the tree that caused the breach in the first place and get a new roof. Well, we did this and we did that, and voila, we had ourselves a beautiful nursery. So, back to my backlog, we had accomplished our dependencies, mark those as complete. We did finish converting the room into a nursery. That was done. I did get knocked up. I don't have a picture for that, but I can tell you that this epic was complete. Next on the list, have another kid. Go to the image. These are my beautiful children. Except this isn't exactly what happened. This happened. Come to find out, identical twins are spontaneous. It's only fraternal twins that run in families. I had not planned on this. This was a classic case of undercommit, over-deliver. Back to my backlog. Definitely had scope creep there, but most certainly complete. Last on my list, update kitchen. By now, my plans had changed. The budget I had available had significantly decreased, but I had adjusted my goals, and I was ready to take this on. Except Hurricane Sandy came. And my house, along with about 10 others, were identified as being in a pretty heavy flood zone. And FEMA came in and said, we realize you have your plans, but you need to put that on hold because we have plans and we're going to raise the houses. This has not happened yet, and so I am blocked. In retrospect, I learned a lot. Upfront planning only takes you so far. Your ability to plan is only as good as your ability to change your plan. Embrace Yagni. This is Martin Fowler of Extreme Programming's mantra. You aren't going to need it. Only focus on what you need when you need it. The rest can become obsolete. Identify stories of epic proportion and break them down into smaller slices. Your end state goal is all the easier to achieve if you understand what steps are necessary to get you there. Expect dependencies and constantly reevaluate your priority order. You don't know what you don't know, and there will always be a discovery phase. And lastly, scope changes. It's inevitable. A lot of these lessons translate to my professional life as well. I'm sure you've experienced this and a story of your own that can be translated. I've had a lot of experience within this industry. I've worked at a number of companies. I've talked to people in different types of industries all across the world. And a lot of them are experiencing a transformation of sorts, whether it be a change in leadership, the manner in which the organization is run, or the ever so popular Agile transformation. And that one commonality between everyone in every company all across the globe is their biggest struggle, our biggest struggle. And that tends to be organizational debt. Organizational debt is what you acquire when you adopt new habits or newer processes without abandoning the old ones. And a lot like technical debt, it's to be expected, and it's okay, provided you have a plan to manage it. But change is hard. And more times than not, we're in a pocket of space being asked to experiment with something new while the rest of the world is still operating under the previous context. But there's a solution. And it's not necessarily a silver bullet, but it's a concept. Greater engagement of people, and servant leadership. Fairly simple concept, right? And I could give you statistics and data that would suggest why this works. And all we need is for our management to take this over, right? Well, conceptualization is great. It's kind of cool to listen to things, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Good news, leadership is not a rank. It's a responsibility. The definition of responsibility, the ability to respond. While being a manager may require one to become assigned, promoted, or elected, anyone can be a servant leader. More good news. Witnessing acts of generosity releases oxytocin. This is otherwise known as the love hormone. It's what you feel when you give someone a hug or make a connection. And we, as humans, have a desire, a natural instinct to try to replicate that feeling. So, I want to talk about operationalization, actually going through some of the tactics that I've used or that I've worked with teams and that have been successful for us. So we'll go into a few of those. And the concept here is that these are things that worked for us because we were demonstrating them and inviting others to take part. And this led to others either evolving upon those ideas or inspiring them to create their own. First things first, the feedback board. And this is actually a picture from Portugal at a conference a lot like this. And the remarkable thing about this feedback board was that the organizers and volunteers put this out on day one. And it invited participants to give feedback on anything from there wasn't enough variety of talks during the same tracks, or I couldn't tell which of the food items were vegan. And the organizers and volunteers would go up, pick the card, display if it was in progress, display if it was something they would focus on in the next conference, or if they had completed it. And the fascinating thing about this particular board was that on the second day, it wasn't just the organizers and volunteers moving cards. It was the attendees. The attendees realized that it was within their power to create change, and they took ownership. So by making a lot of our challenges transparent, it gave anyone and everyone the ability to own or drive change. Lunch and learn with keynote speaker. This is something we struggled with at one of the companies I was with the consultant to full-time employee ratio. And right, wrong, or indifferent, those two populations can be treated differently. And there are certain managers that monitor every minute of what their consultants, contractors are doing. And we found it difficult to create an environment of learning when that was on the table. So by offering knowledge sessions during lunch, we took the negative stigma away. All were welcome, and nobody was questioning where the time was billed. And we invited anyone and everyone who had something to share to speak so that we could develop ourselves. Lean coffee, open space, unconference. I won't spend too much time on this as Paul and team just demonstrated the concept of this. You go somewhere without any agenda. Those who attend create the agenda based on what's on their mind. This model, and all of these terms are utilized to describe this practice, can be used whether you're hosting a retrospective or pulling an organization together, just trying to get feedback. And proposing topics to talk about. If you have windows blocked out, great. If you have limited time, use a voting system. And then agree to time box the items. Maybe you talk about all of them for 2 minutes at a time, or maybe you pick the top 3 and allocate a larger window. Working remote. When I say working remote, what is the first thing you think of? Home working, I heard? That's what I thought of, working from home. That's not what I mean. What we want to think about is the fact that we've been given laptops. Most of us have laptops, and while we can dock it at our prescribed workstation, we can also pick it up and put it in anybody else's working area. We can move ourselves to another table, to another group. The PMO is giving us grief. We can pick up our whole working mode and sit where they sit, understand some of their challenges, see their day-to-day, implanting ourselves in another environment. Kudos wall. Have your recognition out in the open. This is great because I can recognize that Paul put on a great conference, and Paul probably sees that on the kudos board and feels pretty good. Or I can go a step above that and say, Paul delivered a great track on Kanban. And then other people see that and say, wow, he is a subject matter expert. If I have questions about Kanban, maybe I should go talk to him. But making that information transparent and available to all. The flip side of that, celebrate failure. Spotify is known for embracing this concept day to day. I believe I read an article a few years ago about some teammates ringing a bell every time they failed at something. and embracing the growth mentality over the fixed mindset, that there were no failures. Information is all the more valuable when it produces a result that we did not intend upon. And if we hoard that information, if we keep it to ourselves, we do everyone a disservice, because perhaps somebody may repeat that. Let's give everybody the opportunity to learn what we learned. Maybe we can reduce that redundancy. Maybe we can build upon it. Maybe it's the start of a conversation. Individual retrospective reviews. Are we all doing team retrospectives? Good, that's a start. It's not enough. So we like to model the individual retrospective in the same format, and we shifted over to the idea of a performance review. Instead of waiting until the end of year and reacting and documenting everything at the end of the year, either as a manager, try this, or as an employee, suggest this format. Talk about, at a regular cadence, whether that's once every 2 weeks, once every month, what you did well, where you have an opportunity, and what you are going to do to improve, to develop yourself. And that helps the manager, hopefully your leader, own that task collectively. Maybe they're a little in the dark in terms of how they can help you improve. And this allows that to be out in the open. And then when you have your next individual retrospective, you go back to that list and you talk through those challenges, those items you personally have called out as actionable, and see where there's progress. And if there's not, figure out another attack, but do it together and be transparent. Reciprocal mentoring. Does anybody have a mentor? Good. The next time you ask somebody to mentor, or if you are asked to be a mentor, consider adding this on, where you're not only the mentor, but the mentee is offering mentoring as well. I've known a few folks at the executive level who have actually proposed this to their direct reports or reports of their direct reports. And after every town hall, they ask for feedback. They want to know, what was the chatter? Did they think I was a total tool up there? Was there something that the audience received well? And they themselves accept that there's a learning opportunity and an ability for them to improve. 360-degree feedback. There's tools out there. I can go through a performance review tool and solicit feedback. I can ask certain peers to tell me how they think I'm doing, where they think I can improve. But I don't need those formal tools. I can walk up to somebody's desk. I can send an email. I can create a survey monkey. I can generate questions or just give a lot of blanks and ask for feedback. Feedback condenses time. Roundtables. Don't limit it to the people that you directly work with. Consider the organization. Again, if you have those problem areas where somebody from legal always comes in right before you're ready to deploy something and throws you a curveball, maybe they're having a grievance as well. Maybe those other groups, it would just help if you get different samples from the organization in a room to talk about something. Maybe you use that lean coffee technique to identify what challenges you want to talk about as a team. Team level interviews. If I'm hiring someone, more times than not, I'm hiring a scrum master, well, I might meet with them a couple times a week, but I'd rather the people who are meeting with them every day to interview them. Pull the entire team together. Do a panel style interview with the candidate. This gives you an advantage because now you have the team dynamic in one room. You can see how that works. People can hear each other's questions and answers and build upon that. Gumbel walks. This means walk the floor. We were able to convince one of about 7 managers who reported to the CIO to attend daily stand-ups. And on day one, he identified a redundancy between two teams, and he was able to help bring them together, and he felt great. Not only did he help improve the situation, he went back and told his teammates, and this success story inspired them to follow suit. All of a sudden, they were doing Gumbel Walks. Start with your own, share with a friend, and it can grow. Split the agenda. If you have something to teach and you have an hour, only have 30 minutes worth of content. People are more likely to hear your message if you give them a chance to talk. Anytime you are going to be teaching, give yourself an opportunity to learn. Scaled retrospective. You have team-level retrospectives where you identify what you as a team can solve. Put the items that are at an organizational nature in a parking lot, the ones you can't solve. And on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, pull the leadership team into the room and say, these are the top items we've identified. Here's what we need your help with. If you can resolve A, B, or C, we will be all the more efficient. Invite those folks to help. Give them a task. And then come back to the table at your next retrospective and talk through those results. See where those action items lie. And lastly, storytelling. Everyone has something to share. And we're all in a better place when we hear about one another's experiences, when we learn about others' perspectives. So again, this is a great community. If we can share what we know and expand ourselves, we all win. So that's all I have. If you have questions, feel free to reach out after the fact. And I thank you all for this opportunity. Thanks.